I want to welcome those who also be joining us via YouTube. Whenever you see this video, this is for the Morehead Church of Christ. This is our Wednesday evening Bible study. We are studying through the book of Judges, and we're finally on the last chapter. And certainly, as we reflect upon the material that we covered, we realize that it's been a tough period in the history of the nation of Israel, especially as they had great leaders like Moses and Joshua. And then we don't really have anything during the time of the Judges, and then we have leaders when we get to the Kings. In 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, we have King Saul and David and Solomon. This is really the glory years of the nation of Israel. But right now, it's this area, this time period is known in the book of Judges as the Dark Ages, because a lot of things just aren't what they should be. And we've seen how this nation continually goes through these cycles. They're faithful to God, then they fall away, then God let them fall in the hands of their enemies, and then they cry out for God, and then God sends a judge to deliver them, and then they start back on the top. And they make 6 of these kinds of cycles, and you would think they would learn that from the first cycle, that that's not a good idea to fall away from God. And so we've gone through these 6 cycles, went through 13 judges. The last part of the book of Judges is known as the appendices. So that's chapters 18 or 17 all the way through 21. And this is supplemental material that belongs somewhere prior to this, but the author of the book isn't really concerned about everything being in chronological order. He is simply putting this in here to show really more so sort of the moral, the immorality that was going on in the nation, and really the spiritual adultery, and just bringing a little bit more light to those issues. Chapter 21 is really the result of chapter 19. You're going to remember that an incident happened in chapter 19 very similar to sort of Sodom and Gomorrah. This Ephraimite travels through on his way from Bethlehem back to return back to his home in Ephraim. He stops overnight in Gibeah. He's there at an older man's house with his servant and his concubine, and these men of the city surround the old man's house and demand that the old man turn over the Levite to him, because essentially they want to forcibly rape this man from Ephraim. And so what happened, long story short, is the old man put this man's wife out there, and they raped her all night, and she made it back to the old man's house where she's staying at the end of the night, and she died on that doorstep. And so the Levite from Ephraim loaded her up on an animal, took her back home, cut her in 12 pieces, and sent part of her body to all of the tribes of the nation as a rally cry against the crime that was committed against him. And basically all of these tribes came together other than Benjamin, and it was decided that justice had to be served. They're going to demand from the tribe of Benjamin, these worthless fellows that committed this act against this man from Ephraim. And when the tribe of Benjamin did not give those people that were guilty of that crime to them, there was a civil war that broke out between all of the other tribes of Israel and Benjamin. And at the end of this war, the Israelites won. And what happened is the tribe of Benjamin was basically almost to non-existence. So all that's left at the end of chapter 20 is 600 men. There's no children, there's no women, there's just 600 men. And this tribe has vowed that the Israelites, the rest of the Israelite tribes have vowed that they're not going to give their daughters to these Benjamites for wives. And so essentially they have handwritings on the wall. They're going to be exterminated because you can't further their tribe. And so chapter 21 is really dealing with sort of the aftermath of really the realization of what's happened, the tremendous predicament that there may actually be the loss of an entire tribe due to this civil war. So we will reread the first few verses since we covered them last week. And then we're going to start in verse 5 through 7. So Ryan, if you want to do 5 through 7, I'm going to just read 1 through 4. I'm just going to give them out there and bring us up to where we need to be here. So chapter 21, beginning verse 1, it says, Now the men of Israel had sworn in Mizpah, saying, None of us shall give his daughter to Benjamin in marriage. So the people came to Bethel and sat there before God until evening, and lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. They said, Why, O Lord God of Israel, has this come about in Israel, so that one tribe should be missing today in Israel? It came about the next day that the people rose early, built an altar, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings.
Then you said me, right?
Yes.
Then the sons of Israel said, Who is there among all the tribes of Israel who did not come up in the assembly to the Lord? For they had taken a great oath concerning him who did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah, saying, He shall surely be put to death. And the sons of Israel were sorry for their brother Benjamin, and said, One tribe is cut off from Israel today. What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since we have sworn by the Lord not to give them any of our daughters in marriage?
Okay. So I want to just draw your attention back to what happened when the Civil War broke. Remember that the sons of Israel lost the first 2 battles to Benjamin, and it appears that the reason why they lost it is because they weren't right in terms of their dealing with the situation and in relation to God. In other words, they're asking God for military information about which tribe is going to go up first versus, is this a good idea for us to really go to war with the tribe of Benjamin over these worthless fellows that committed this crime? And so God essentially told them the information they want, but he wasn't with them. And they lost the first 2 battles, lost some 40,000 men. And after they lost the first 2 battles, remember, they offered up the burnt offerings and the peace offerings. And essentially we have God essentially saying to them that I'm going to be with you in battle. And when he was, they were victorious. And essentially they won that war in that single battle. But there were a lot of people Benjamin killed. Remember that the Israelites had 400,000, so they lost 40,000 men. That means there was 360,000 men left of that battle. Remember that Benjamin had started out with 25,700. Let me get that right. Or is it 26? 26,700. And by the time the battle's over, they're down to 600 men. So it was a huge defeat. And what we know from the end of chapter 20 is not only did they win that battle, but the sons of Israel essentially went throughout the territory of Benjamin. They attacked every city. They killed everybody in those cities, and then they set them on fire. This is why we only have 600 men left. Essentially, they went well beyond essentially what God essentially was wanting them to do. God was going to be with them in battle, but God was never essentially part of this effort beyond that. Essentially, they were so zealous in trying to bring this tribe to justice that we would consider it overkill. In other words, it went way beyond what should have actually taken place. So here we are now on the other side of this, and there's a realization by the sons of Israel that there's only 600 left. Why it took them so long to sort of realize that, we don't know. But the idea is now this is going to be a huge problem because, well, we made this oath before this even took place when we fought them in battle that none of us would give daughters to them, to the men of that tribe for wives. And so here we are. And there becomes here sort of a ray of hope, if you will, in that they are now sort of taking stock or taking account of who was at that battle. In other words, when they sent the messengers out to draw everybody together at Mizpah, was everybody that was summoned to be there show up essentially at Mizpah? And if not, then there's going to be a penalty, and the penalty, verse 5, is he shall surely be put to death. This becomes somewhat of a ray of hope for the problem that they're going to deal with, and we'll get into that a little bit more in this chapter. But I want us to notice here that in the Song of Deborah, earlier on in the book, the fourth judge of Israel and Barak, the commander of the army of Israel, in celebrating the Lord's help in defeating their Canaanite oppressors, they revealed that after the battle was over, there was one town that did not show up for this call to arms, and it was a place called Meroz, M-E-R-O-Z, Judges 5:23. And because they did not answer the call of arms, if you remember back there, the angel of the Lord issued a curse upon these people, that is sort of misfortune or harm, because they failed to do what they should have done. They were close to the battle, they were being summoned to help their Israelite brothers, and they failed to show up. And so what we have here is something similar that's going to take place in relation to Jabez, Gilead. It turns out that we have one town of people that do not show up here. Verse 6 says, and the sons of Israel were sorry for their brother Benjamin, we're talking about the whole tribe, and said, one tribe is cut off today. And so now, all of a sudden, they went from this extreme passion to make sure that justice was served beyond what needed to be served. And then all of a sudden, once all the dust settles, so to speak, hey, there's only 600 men left of the entire tribe. And so now they realize really what their extreme reaction was and what it sort of left. It decimated the tribe of Benjamin, and now they're filled with compassion. In other words, what's going to become of this tribe? They're essentially going to go into extinction. We've got to do something here, or that's what's going to take place. Verse 7 says, what shall we do for wives for those who are left, since we have sworn by the Lord not to give them any of our daughters in marriage? And so this is really a dilemma that they created themselves. Imagine this, even before they go to battle against the tribe of Benjamin, they're just seem like they're so angry with them that they're essentially saying, you know what, we're for here on out, we're not going to ever let any of our daughters marry with the men of this tribe. Imagine doing that before you even go into the battle. I mean, it just seems like there was no really reason to do that. They were there essentially to call them to account in terms of that injustice, but the idea that they're so put out about it that they're already taking these oaths that really didn't have to be made. And again, it really shows you that they're not really using the best of judgment. And I think what we see a lot of times here, especially in these last few chapters, has been really about a lot of bad decisions with, bad consequences. And this is really what's going on here. Any thoughts or questions so far, Jenna?
Is this the only area where the tribe of Benjamin was at in Israel?
Is it only area? Yeah, I mean, they have their territory. Unlike Dan, who, sort of getting pushed out, they find a new location so that they have more room. I mean, they're just in the one area because each one had their, in the promised land, each one was allotted a certain portion of territory based on how big the tribe was. So the bigger the tribe was, as far as population, the bigger the plot of land that you had, and the smaller the tribe was, then you got a smaller portion of land. And so when you look at actually the territories of the land issued in the promised land, what you'll see is they're actually fairly small. They're not the smallest, but they're smaller than, say, like Manassas. You have Manassas, and then you have East Manassas, so you have on the other side of the Jordan River, you got two huge land masses, so they, there must have been very sizable to have that kind of territory. So, but good question. Let's go into the next few verses then. Jenna, do you want to read verses 8 through 12, please?
Okay. And they said, what one is there of the tribes of Israel who did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah? And behold, no one had come to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. For when the people were numbered, behold, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. And the congregation set 12,000 of the valiant warriors there, and commanded them, saying, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, with the women and the little ones. And this is the thing that ye shall do. You shall utterly destroy every man and every woman who has lain with a man. And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had not known a man by lying with him. And they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan.
Okay, very good. So, just as we dealt with some of the injustice of chapter 19, we talk about what happened there. Just because the Bible talks about somebody doing something that is very immoral, it is very, just the idea of slaughtering and things like that, doesn't always mean that God was in favor of it. This has no evidence that God essentially said he wanted this to be done. These guys, remember the common phrase in the book is doing what was right in their own eyes. This was their decision. They thought, well, now these guys, they've essentially committed injustice. They didn't show up. And so now we have to do something against them. And so the idea was, well, I guess we're gonna kill them all. And so we shouldn't think that just because the Bible says something, this is sort of the author telling us really historically, matter-of-factly, what these people do, but this doesn't go back to God at all because God never told them to do this. This is what they chose to do in relation to this town not showing up to help in this battle. So we want to look at verse 8. It says, this is the sons of Israel, and they said, what one of the tribes of Israel who did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah, and behold, no one had come to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. So when he saw no one come up to the camp, this is where all the people came together at Mizpah. In other words, they didn't come up to Mizpah. And Jabesh Gilead is a town in Gilead. Remember, Gilead is an area on the east side of the Jordan River. So you have East Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben. So we're talking about an area on the east side of the Jordan River. And somehow or another, they took an accounting. So if you've got elders there from each one of the tribes representing it, they could easily, list off all of the places. Do we have people from this town, this city? Do we have people? And then they could sort of figure out, okay, hey, wait a minute, we're missing somebody from this particular community. And so this is probably how they went about trying to figure out who was there and who wasn't. Verse 9 says, for when the people were numbered, behold, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. And this essentially turns out to be a terrible situation for these people. Now here's the thing. Why didn't they show up? It is presumed, based on the messengers going out there, that everybody was notified. So the Bible's not telling us why they essentially thumbed their nose at this call to action. Okay, and so we don't know why. And it's not that they say, well, we didn't get the message. Everybody got the message, but we don't know why they didn't come. But they should have come, because it's going to come at a high price for them. Verse 10 says, and the congregation sent 12,000 of the valiant soldiers there, and commanded them, saying, go and strike the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead with the edge of the sword, with the women and the little ones. And this is where it's difficult to really understand, but we know from secular wars, this isn't too far-fetched. When we think about some of the horrific battles that have been fought and the wars that have been fought, these are some of the terrible things that happen. It doesn't seem to make any sense. Why would you kill all the little ones? Why did you kill all the women? It's the men that didn't show up. You know, the women weren't supposed to show up in Mizpah, it was the men. So some of it doesn't really make sense, but the idea is very clear that, you know, sometimes when the sinner sins, there's consequences that affect those with the sinner. Sometimes when somebody doesn't do what they're supposed to do, there's consequences that affect others.
For everyone, yeah.
Yep. And so when we look at that, we can sort of understand how they got to that place. In other words, because the men of that community didn't show up to fight, there's going to be a consequence for everybody. Now that would certainly be a message sent that in the future, if there's ever another call to arms, that people will probably think twice about not showing up, because they're going to remember what happened in this situation. These valiant men, sometimes they're called, when you read about them in, David with his mighty men. This is really another word for the same thing. The mighty men or valiant men. The idea of bravery and boldness. In other words, these are elite troops. And we're going to send 12,000 elite troops, and it's not going to be a good picture. There's not going to be anybody stopping them. The men of that city might be able to be there. They might be there and put up a fight, but they're not going to win, because these men are going to overpower them, and they're going to accomplish the objective of really destroying the whole city. So, verse 11 said, "This is the thing that you shall do. You shall utterly destroy every man, every woman who has lain with a man." And what they're talking about here, sometimes the phraseology sounds a little different to us from a modern perspective. We're not talking about, when it says, and every woman who has lain with man, we're not really talking about loose women. We're really talking about women who are not married and not widows, okay? And we're wondering, well, how would they know this? You know, the Bible doesn't tell us. How would they know that? So, and we can only suppose that maybe the idea that...
The only way they would know if they were not virgins. I
Right.
mean,
Well, one of the things is the way they dressed. You remember that there were certain clothes that the virgins wore, and in situations like that, we can remember what happened with one of David's sons laying with his sister, and the idea is she was wearing some kind of virgin attire, and that she tore that as a result of being raped. So the idea that they wear some special attire, and that's what we're talking about here. Did the women that essentially were married, the idea is once you have children, it changes your body. So, you're not probably going to look exactly the way you did before you had children. So, I mean, we just don't know. We don't know, but the idea is they essentially are going to do something here that is a little unconventional in terms of really what they promised to do here. They promised essentially the whole town is going to be put to death here, and that's what sounds like is going to happen. But then we read verse 12. It says, "And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh 400 young virgins who had not known a man by lying with him, and they brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan." And so here, they were supposed to go and they were supposed to kill everybody. There was a decision made that, hey, we have these 400 virgins. Let's spare their lives. Let's take them back to the sons of Israel where they're camped at Shiloh. And maybe this is a solution to our problem, seeing that we have 600 men left of the entire tribe of Benjamin. This may be an answer to what we're looking for. Any thoughts or comments so far?
well, the Israelites wasn't supposed to sleep with no other nationalities.
What's that?
The Israelites, the Jews.
Yep.
They're not supposed to sleep with any other nationalities.
Right.
and
They're
stuff,
supposed to
so
be
They have to keep it within,
right within their own tribes.
Yeah, so.
They're not to marry like
So
Gentiles.
these tribe of Benjamin,
Canaanites.
they're Israelites, aren't they?
Yep.
So, I'm trying to decide the enemies.
Well,
Which is
there's,
that old man and
Yeah.
then the,
they were from
with the
a
girl
city.
they raped.
Yeah, they were from a city in Israel. So they were in the tribe of Benjamin, a city within there, which were Israelites.
So the tribe of Benjamin is,
Yeah, they're
responsible
God's
for-
people. They're they're one of the 12 tribes of Israel. So, it's a sad thing when you sort of see this is a civil war that's taking place here. We think about the American Civil War, how bad that was. The idea of Americans killing Americans. This is sort of the same thing, but worse than that is the idea of it's God's people that are at war with each other.
Yeah.
So, essentially, after they go down and fight this battle, they win that, they bring back 400 young virgins to that camp at Shiloh, and we'll go on to verse 13 through 15. Brian, do you want to read that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Then the whole congregation sent word to the people of Benjamin who were at the rock of Rimmon, and proclaimed peace to them. And Benjamin returned at that time, and they gave them the women whom they had saved alive of the women of Jabez Gilead, but they were not enough for them. And the people had compassion on Benjamin because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel.
Okay, so remember we talked about that Rock of Rimmon place. It was some kind of place of refuge. Remember, once the battle turned from the soldiers of Benjamin, it looked like they're winning at first, but remember they set them up. The Lord said they were going to be with the sons of Israel, so they went up to Gibeah. They engaged this battle. Then some of the men died of Israel, and they looked like they were going to run off. And the sons of Benjamin that were there really protecting Gibeah were drawn away from the city. What happened? Well, the main force of the Israelites were drawing the Benjamites soldiers away to fight them. What happened to Gibeah?
It was a trap.
Okay, it was an ambush. So as soon as the soldiers of the tribe of Benjamin got far enough away, there was another body of soldiers that were in hiding. They came out of hiding. They fought against the city because basically they were not defended well, and they overpowered the city. They started it on fire. Okay, so what happened was once the sons of Israel turned the tables and they had an advantage against the sons of Benjamin, the sons of Benjamin recognized they were going to be defeated, and so they had nowhere to flee. They couldn't go back to Gibeah. It was burning up, and you had the soldiers coming out of there, so it forced them out into the wilderness, and it forced them to place the Rock of Rimmon, which was some kind of place that offered them a refuge, and that's why they went there. But in verse 13 it says, "Then the whole congregation sent word and spoke to the sons of Benjamin who were at the Rock of Rimmon and proclaimed peace." In other words, hey, the war's over. Don't worry about it. The war's over. We're done fighting. You can sort of come out and you can return to your homes. And so that's what verse 14 says. Benjamin returned at that time. They're talking about them going back to their territory, going back to their lives. And it says, and they gave them the women whom they had kept alive from the women of Jabesh Gilead, yet they were not enough for them. So now you had 600 men. Hey, here's 400 virgin daughters that we got from Jabesh Gilead. Okay, we got 2/3 of them covered. Now things are a lot better than they were to start with. One thing that we're curious about is that they made an oath, essentially, or they had determined that they were going to, by oath, to destroy whoever didn't come up to Mizpah. And did they carry that oath out, the sons of Israel? Because they were supposed to kill everybody from that town or that city or towns or cities that did not respond, and essentially they found some way to get around that. And perhaps the idea is they try to justify it by saying, well,
And who
Instead
said
of-
that? Did God say it was supposed to kill all them people?
no, that was their own determination. They were going to do that on their own determination.
So you said they got
Yeah.
around that.
Well, their oath. They were supposed to. Their oath that they made said they were supposed to kill everybody that didn't show up to Mizpah from all of these different communities within Israel. And so they find a community that didn't show up, or a town, Jabesh Gilead, and so they sent the 12,000 soldiers there to kill them, except that didn't happen. 400 of them were spared. And what I'm saying is if you essentially make an oath to destroy them, and you don't fulfill that oath, then you're using God's name in vain, because you've made an oath that you were going to do that. And here's the problem is, if everybody is doing what's right in their own eyes, then they're not always committed to doing what's right all the time. And this really becomes the theme of this book. In other words, it seems like God's people would do what he wants some of the time, but they would do what they wanted to do, seems like most of the time. They weren't really committed to God in the way they should. If they were committed to God, God would not have allowed their oppressors to rise up over them and oppress them for 20 years, 40 years. But because they were rebellious people, this is what happened with them. And so it's very unfortunate we read about the things that they're doing. In other words, instead of consulting God about what to do with these people that didn't show up, they just sort of take it upon themselves and say, this is what we're going to do. It's always, God is sort of the afterthought. And when we think about that in our lives today, we should not be sort of thinking about, let's just do whatever we're going to do. And then if something goes wrong, then we'll consult God. You can sort of see how that'd be very backwards. But what we should be doing is we should be consulting God about the plans that we intend to pursue, to ask for his wisdom, to see if that's the right thing for our lives, versus if they fall through, then we ask for God's help in the end.
And adding on to that, I mean, the same thing could be said as as Christians, when we say we're going to do something,
Right.
we got to do it. We can't just
Right.
be like, I'm going to do it, and then you change it, and
Right.
this is the
Yeah,
same thing.
we studied the last Sunday night about Jesus in Matthew 5:33 through 37, where he talked about let your yes be yes and your no, no. And that's the whole point, is the business with oaths is where they were being exploited by the Pharisees to their advantage. In other words, they seem to use that to be able to manipulate and get what they want. And then when they were supposed to do something, they'd say, well, hey, I swore by the temple, but I didn't swear by the gold of the temple. I didn't take an oath if I would have taken an oath by the gold of the temple, well, I would have had to follow through with it. But I just took an oath by the temple. And the idea is that is so shameful, because Jesus is saying, the idea is the temple housed the gold, and the temple belongs to God. And it just really shows you how shallow it is. But yeah, the idea is if you say you're going to do something, and we're talking about things that are moral, ethical, and what's right, then we need to follow through. And that's how it should be. So let's get to verse 15 here. And the people were sorry for Benjamin. We're talking about the sons of Israel, we're talking about the tribe of Benjamin, because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. Now this becomes a sort of an interesting thought, because how is it possible that essentially the Lord made a breach in the tribes of Israel when it was the sons of Israel who, after the battle they successfully won with God's help, went about really destroying all of these communities with men, women, and children, and burning up the cities? How do we explain the fact that the Lord, the writer of the book of Judges, says the Lord made a breach in the tribes of Israel?
Is it more so that he allowed a breach
Okay.
in order for his righteous plan?
Okay, so here's the thing about one thing that we've got to recognize in the Bible is that there is something called God's permissive agency. In other words, God has all power in heavens and the earth, and he allows mankind freedom to do what he's going to do. If mankind does something that is against God's will, that doesn't mean God is powerless to do anything about it, or that he can't stop it, or that he believes it's acceptable. what it means is that God is allowing the person that's doing wrong to do their wrong. They're going to face the consequences. But the idea is because they have free will, God is essentially going to allow them to believe what they want to believe, to do what they want to do. And essentially, in the end, there's going to be consequences. So when the writer writes this, he's not essentially laying the blame at God's feet. He's using this idea of God's permissive agency. In other words, God allowed them, these zealous sons of Israel, to essentially do what they were going to do. And essentially, it was their decision to do it. But the idea is God never told them to do that. It's really talking about the fact that God allowed them to do that. Because there's nowhere before this or after that where it says that God wanted this done. And the idea of the fact that they almost exterminated a nation really indicates that that wasn't part of God's will, because God, wanted the 12 tribes to be maintained. So,
Well, God lets certain things happen in people's life to bring about His will too.
right,
And some people will think that's, whatever happened, God brought that to them and can be a sinful thing.
right,
And you need to learn to differentiate that too. So,
Right.
there's certain things that God allows for
Right.
tests too. Tests, trials, tribulations. So there's things that God's going to allow that happen to test you, to see how you're going to handle that test and how you're going to come through that test.
sure,
So you have to have perseverance
Right.
and stuff, to have endurance and
Right.
stuff. So, just like them, there was things that was allowed to come to them. Apparently they didn't handle it in the right situation
sure,
and stuff, because they used God's name in vain.
Right.
They said to do something. And you got to watch that, because I've seen so many people in my life, swear to God. Or Jamie used to I swear to, and I just used to wait for him to drop dead and stuff, because, I don't do that. I don't swear to God and stuff.
Right.
I think it's just disrespectful and dangerous
right,
and stuff. So, but, we've got to watch, if we say something, and use God, we better make sure we're able to do that
right,
and stuff, it needs to be kosher and stuff. So there's
Yeah.
a lot of people out there today that says, God's going to do this and that for you. You're going to get this and that tomorrow. They can't do that.
yeah,
And stuff, only God knows what's going to happen through your success and through what's,
Right.
every day,
right.
your
There's a-
blessings. So,
Yeah, there's a lot of people that get the idea that, if God hates evil and all this evil continues to go on, why doesn't God stop it? And they don't realize that's God's permissive agency. You have free will. God reveals in the Word of God what His will is, but because He's given you free will, He has to allow you to do not only to obey Him, but to disobey Him. But to think that since all this evil goes on and nothing seems to happen to anybody doing evil, that God either doesn't care or has changed His mind about sin is sort of a ridiculous position to take, since the Bible essentially says that everyone is going to bow the knee before Jesus. Everyone is going to be held accountable for the things they do in the flesh, and essentially, that there's going to be rewards and punishments given out at the end of this life. So, let's pick up and go here. We're very close to the end here. Verses 16 through 18 says, Then the elders of the congregation said, "What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin?" And they said, "There must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, that a tribe may not be blotted out from Israel. But we cannot give them wives of our daughters, for the sons of Israel had sworn, saying, 'Cursed is he who gives a wife to Benjamin.'" So the sons of Israel created a problem by being overzealous for justice, and then essentially in defeating the army, and then going beyond that and attacking the cities of Benjamin, and killing all the occupants and destroying the cities. And so we're coming back to the same place we were back in verses 6 and 7. So we were really just a repeat of that, except for, as Kyle and Dalish in their commentary said here in this passage, he says verses 15, 16, and 18 are a repetition verses 6 and 7 with a slight change of expression. What I want to say is what plays out in verses 19 through 23 is done specifically here with the purpose of the remaining 200 men. In other words, they're bringing back something they said earlier, but they've already found 400 virgins. So that's 400 men. They got 400 virgins. So we've got wives for all them. We still have 200 men outstanding. And so now we have a plan that they have a plan that they're going to do in order to accommodate the other 200 men of Benjamin who do not have wives. And you have to hand them to it. It's pretty creative. Verses 19 through 24. Somebody want to read 19 through 24? Okay, go ahead, Mike.
So it said, Behold, there is a feast of the Lord from year to year in Shiloh, which is on the north side of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and on the south side of Lebanon. And they commanded the sons of Benjamin, saying, Go and lie in wait in the vineyards, and watch, and behold, if the daughters of Shiloh come out to take part in the dances, then you shall come out of the vineyards, and each of you shall catch his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. It shall come about when their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us, that we shall say to them, Give them to us voluntarily, because we did not take for each man of Benjamin a wife in battle, nor did you give them to them, else you would now be guilty. These sons of Benjamin did so, and took wives according to their number from those who danced, whom they carried away. And they went and returned to their inheritance, and rebuilt the cities and lived in them. One more.
Yep, verse 24. Yep.
The sons of Israel departed from there at the time, every man to his tribe and family, and each one of them went out from there to his inheritance.
Okay, so here we have essentially the sons of Israel. Did they inquire of the Lord for this plan that they had? They're not inquiring of the Lord a lot. I mean, they did at first, but they were inquiring only for God to give them an answer for something they wanted to know, not necessarily for what they wanted to do. And here they're getting ready to do something else, and essentially there's no, taking to the Lord and say, Lord, what is it that we should do here? And again, it brings to mind, our walk with God and the idea of importance of recognizing we shouldn't launch out on our own as the people of God and really just sort of do what we want to do and sort of reach out to God here and there and think about, well, what does He want us to do? We should always sort of be mindful of the fact that God is someone that's trying to help us in this life, that we need His help. And when we are essentially walking with God, we're wanting to consult God for His will for our life. And so we're gonna look at what they did here. So they're talking about a feast. It seems to be one of the major feasts of the mandatory feasts. There were 3 mandatory feasts that all of the sons of Israel had to attend. That's Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles or Booths. We don't have time to really get in to explain those. But this is one of these major feasts. And Shechem is located in Manasseh, north of Ephraim. Lebanon is a town in Ephraim, according to Nelson's Illustrated Bible Dictionary, situated on the highway that led north from Jerusalem to Shechem. So what the sons of Israel are doing is finding a way around their oath, not to voluntarily give their daughters in marriage to the men of the tribe of Benjamin. What they plan to do is devise a situation, since they've got this feast going on, and they have these virgin daughters from the city of Shiloh, essentially dancing in celebration of this feast. It is not a sensual dance, but it's much like a dance like Miriam and the other women after the Egyptians died in sea after the walls of water came down upon them. It was a victory dance. It was a celebration dance. And so here the sons of Israel saying, you know what? These last 200 men, what we'll do is we'll just have them sort of hiding in that area. And when these virgin daughters of Shiloh come out and dance, we'll have them snatch their wives from among these women who are celebrating the feast of the Lord. It says in verse 21, and watch and behold, if the daughters of Shiloh come out and take part of the dances, then you shall come out of the vineyards, and each of you shall catch his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. And so here's how they're going to make up the difference for their wives. In Exodus 15:20, it says, Miriam the prophetess and Aaron's sister took the timbrel. A timbrel is like a small tambourine. Took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and dancing. So it's a celebration. We're talking about several days of feasting, and this is what they're doing, is they're celebrating together as all women dancing, and they're to go and really just snatch their wives. Of course, it's kidnapping. They're going to kidnap their wives. Verse 22 is really going to be the result of the men of Shiloh, or the brothers of Shiloh, saying, hey, somebody stole our daughters. Okay, they're going to take the complaints to the sons of Israel and complain about what's happening. And we'd like to think that they're concerned about the fact that their daughter is being snatched, but it seems like they're more concerned about the fact that their daughters are going to the men of the tribe of Benjamin. What was not supposed to happen? They had all made an oath, right?
Not to have wives.
Not to give their daughters to the men of the tribe of Benjamin, and look what's happened. And so I like what Leon D. Stancliffe in his commentary.
They contradicted themselves because everyone named the daughters to have wives.
So Leon D. Stancliffe in God's Message Bible Commentary on the book of Joshua says, a serious complication could be predicted. What would be the reaction from the fathers and brothers of the captured maidens found out what had happened? After all, this could bring a curse upon those who were related to the maidens because of the oath. They were not to give their daughters to the men of Benjamin. The reply was to be that they had not truly given their daughters and sisters. The women had been taken but not given. You can sort of see the idea was as well, you didn't voluntarily give them, so technically you didn't violate the oath. Essentially, they were snatched from you. So you don't have to worry about the curse of the oath. And so that's what you're left with. Verse 23 says the sons of Benjamin did so, and they took wives according to the number from those who had danced, and they carried away, and they went and returned to their inheritance and rebuilt their cities and lived in them. And so essentially they go back. Of course, they have children. They essentially rebuild their cities, and essentially the tribe of Benjamin starts to grow. And by the way, guess where the first king of first king of Israel came from? King Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin. Verse 24 says, the sons of Israel departed from there. At that time, every man to his tribe and family, and each one of them went out from there to his inheritance. So this goes back to chapter 20 and verse 8, where all of the sons of Israel had gathered really for the injustice that happened. The Ephraimite told them what had happened in Gibeah, and they said, we're not going back to our tents nor to our cities until the matter is taken care of. Well, the matter is taken care of, and so they all return home. And what an interesting verse that the author or the writer of Judges uses to close out the book. Verse 25, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. So when we read through this book and we get disgusted at what happened in chapter 19, what happened in this chapter, and we see how lots of things that shouldn't have been happening were happening, this is why. In other words, it seems like they did some of what God wanted them to do, but they weren't committed to all of it. And if you'll recall at the very beginning of the book, is that after Joshua and the elders that were with Joshua had passed away, they had a generation that really didn't know God. And so that explains why things were so bad. And it really helps us to understand how important it is to teach our children about God in our families and in the church, so that the church essentially has people that are committed to following God's way and committed to doing God's will.
But I've said many times, be wise in God's eyes, not wise in your eyes. Pride comes before the fall.
Right.
You know, Proverbs 16:18. So
Right.
that seems to be the problem in here.
Yeah.
They've you know, they're stiff-necked
Yeah.
and stuff. So
So we ask ourselves, you know, in a book like this, when we look at that, you know, the idea is we can't really just sort of see this as all history and no relevance. Obviously, if it's inspired by the Holy Spirit, there is relevance to us today. Paul will talk about Romans 15:4 about the things that were written of aforetime, essentially were for our benefit. In other words, we're supposed to, when we read the Old Testament, we're not supposed to say, well, that's just old history. It really doesn't have any relevance today. We're living in the 21st century. And the idea is God's people are going to face temptation today. They're going to face all kinds of deals with the pride and greed and all these different things. And there's just an invaluable amount of information in the Old Testament about, you know, when you live for God, things are going to come out well in your life. If you essentially don't live for God and you do some of what God wants, or you just leave God, it's not going to go well for you. And so the blessing is hey, these people, we can play armchair quarterback all day long, and the idea is it's easy to sit in judgment of them, but you know, are we any better than they? Are we doing something? Are we at where we're supposed to be? Is what the words I'm trying to get. Are we at the place that we should be? And if we're not, the idea is how much better are we going to be than them if we're not really living up to God's expectations today as He's given us His word?
I know Pride that killed a man. He had COPD, so he didn't have COPD. He went to the doctors, but he needed to be diagnosed with COPD. He never did it, and eventually he died. You know, because he wasn't on a regimen. You know, and of course he smoked. But that's what pride does to you. You know, you think you know it all and stuff. You don't look to God for the answers. You think you know it all. That's dangerous.
Right. Well, we just I want to thank those who watched our video today. God bless you. Hope it'll be a blessing to your life.